Ecologists and rewilders want to make the maximum impact on the world around us. But if you look at the land managed for nature in the UK, it's just a tiny fraction of the whole. Just under 2% of Scottish land is a national nature reserve, whereas it's less than 1% of land in England. 71% of the land is agricultural. Making small changes to the way that farmers manage their land could then have just as big an impact as all our nature reserves put together. But farmers and ecologists don't always see eye to eye. Today, I want to try and explore what an ecologist might look like to a farmer and how we can work together to our mutual benefit. There's a powerful myth that's taken hold among us. It goes like this: ecologists and farmers don't share common values. We can't work productively together because we're on opposite teams. Farmers are only interested in productivity, and ecologists, well, we're only interested in the environment, but the myth is wrong. Stereotypes can be helpful, but they can obviously be harmful too. They can divide us when we can't see past them. Just like ecologists, there's a huge diversity of people with a wide range of politics working in farming. Having a productive conversation with a farmer requires that ecologists listen just as much as they talk. For who is going to know the land better than a farmer? Imagine spending not hours or days surveying a site, but decades of your life driving the same lanes, seeing the same hedges, ditches and bogs. Imagine for a minute that you've seen the land change over time, watching it through the seasons, seeing how this little puddle always formed here, where the grass was compacted and speckled with silverweed, or feeling the wind on your cheek as you rounded that bend in the lane and instinctively knowing where the sheltered patches would be that day, the sunny spots where you could sit out of the breeze, where the butterflies would congregate to feed on the bramble flowers. When the team at Ecosulis visits a site to do a survey, we're only taking a single picture. Farmers have a whole film running on a loop in their minds. They may not even know it. When we work with farmers to develop a management plan for their land, we've learned not to come in, assess the site and deliver the goods. We know so very little about this landscape. Instead, what we'll do, we'll talk to the land managers, and when I say talk, I really mean listen. So here's what we learned from listening. Many farmers are fed up. They've read the manual and followed the instructions. Over the years, they've jumped through all the hoops that each successive government put in place, followed the guidance laid out, buying expensive equipment and intensifying their methods over time to get more yield from the same land. They slowly but surely run their family finances into the ground so that government subsidies are all that stands between them and bankruptcy. They work all hours of the day and night and have little to show for it. That's what they've been told to do. They know that their soils have suffered from it. Many of them accept that these methods aren't sustainable, but they follow the instructions. They provided for us, for the British public. That was their duty as a farmer. That was what they were raised to do. Now, along comes Johnny Ecologist and a barn owl apparently. "You're doing it wrong," says Johnny Ecologist. "Look at all this biodiversity that you've destroyed. But don't worry, we'll fix your problem. Here are some different steps to follow. Some more guidance. Throughout that old rule book, here's a new one." If you're cringing right now, that's a good thing. That means you're starting to think like a farmer. And thinking like a farmer is a great way to begin a conversation with them. So, how do we find common ground between farmers and ecologists? When farmers are already tired of being told what to do? Well, one of the lowest priorities in ecology tends to be profit. Why, as an ecologist, will we be interested in optimising yield when it has no bearing on biodiversity? In fact, yield, the productivity per hectare, is often thought of as the enemy of conservation. Organic farming isn't optimising for yield. Switching to organic is subsidised by the government, as farmers take such a financial hit when they do it. But, as a farmer once told me, If you can't stand at the farm gate and talk in pounds and pence, you might as well go home. Farmers aren't focused on money because they're profit hungry. It's because keeping a farm profitable keeps it afloat. So, when you first approach a farmer, find out which bits of the farm are money pits, which parcels of land are barely covering costs, which corners of the field are so waterlogged that their yield is negligible. How much does it cost to keep hedges trimmed, and how often are they trimmed? Remember, finances are fundamental to farmers' motivations. When Ecosulis looked into restoring the farmland at an arable farm in Oxfordshire, this is how we did it. The farmer pointed out some fields that barely made any money, and some corners that could be sliced off without impacting the bottom line. He told us how much he was spending on hedgerow maintenance, and we told him how much he could save by reducing the frequency of flaying. He was delighted. The changes we suggested made barely an impact to his overall finances, but would improve biodiversity significantly, allowing him to benefit from ecological services. By following a single vision across the entire site, along with the restoration of hedgerows, we connected up these new biodiverse patches with a single management strategy. But to the farmer, the most important thing, it was the cost. Elsewhere in the UK, we've tested no-fence livestock collars to replace labour-intensive electric fencing systems. Now, the technology works and it's extremely effective, but it's only relevant where the high cost of the collars is less than the cost of labour. But how can we go beyond talking about costs and benefits in purely financial terms? Well, I had a really useful conversation recently with someone from the farming community. She grew up on a farm and still works the land from time to time. She told me that farmers don't just want to be told what to do, they also want to know why they're being asked to do it and be allowed to make up their own minds about management strategies that they pursue on their own land. So, don't be afraid to dip your toes into the science when explaining your advice. There are some key scientific points that farmers and ecologists can agree on. Soil health is one of these. Rewilding interventions like pig rooting can improve the soil structure, reducing compaction over time, preventing waterlogging. Compaction has a big impact on arable yield, as waterlogging causes crops to die. So, don't be afraid to talk about that with a farmer. Remember that rewilding and ecological restoration isn't necessarily a permanent process. Try to think of natural processes as a way to heal land. You can cycle fields in and out of rewilding to recover yield, rather than locking down a patch for nature in perpetuity. Now, ecological services, well, they may be a bit of a harder sell. I know that we're all taught at university that pollinators, insectivores and predators from biodiverse natural spaces benefit farmers, and yes, it may be useful to talk about Hillsden, where marginal and low-yielding land was taken out of production and the yield of adjacent land increased so much that overall productivity wasn't affected. But remember, when you're asking a farmer to take land out of production, they'll want to know that on their land, on their farm, the benefits will outweigh the costs. And realistically, that's going to be impossible to conclusively predict. Perhaps it's better then to frame this argument in terms of the subsidies and the grants which are on offer to fund these interventions. You can then refer to ecological services and case studies like Hillsden as a nice bonus which helps the farmer to understand not only what they're doing, but also why they're doing it. There's a third topic which is likely to be an easier sell: orchards and silviculture in general, animals and trees on the same land in particular. This is not only good for biodiversity, replicating our ancient wood pasture landscape, but it can be profitable too. Think about the various options here, not just apple trees and sheep, but cattle and forestry, or chickens and biomass willow. Any one of these systems could be better for biodiversity than focusing exclusively on just trees or just livestock. Remember that significant gains can be delivered across a huge network of farms. Don't focus on the small uplift in one system. Scale is our friend here. Farmers are the custodians of our countryside. Their legacy is the health and success of their farms and businesses. Their farms are not just small holdings, but vast networks that cover over 70% of our landscape. Remember that when you're talking to them, and think like a farmer first, then an ecologist. It might just help you to have a bigger impact. I'll be at the Gathering Festival this weekend, so if you're there, I'd be delighted to see you. Do come and say hi. I've been Chris. I work for Ecosulis and my website is howtorewild.co.uk.